Hey guys, how's it going? All right, I had the long-awaited deep dive into Muscle Mag. All right, as I've said before, I've never actually read an issue of Muscle Mag. I've seen them in newsstands. I'm familiar with the publication, but I've never actually bought or read one. Just for some reason, I just stuck to the Weeders. And I remember when this was in movie theaters. This came out in September 1991, and I ended up working in a local movie theater sometime around the release of this movie. So I remember seeing it in the theater. As well as a lot of classics from that era. Back when movie theaters were a thing. That was the only way to see like the AAA movies, the AAA movies that were released. So anyway, yeah, I remember when this was in the theaters, and it was a huge deal with all the computer effects and everything, the CGI. So anyway, Muscle Mag. Thanks again, Jeff Lambert. And I open up and I see Lee Haney. Now look, for the record, I purposely avoided reading through this beforehand. As I said, I've never seen Muscle Mag before, so I wanted my reaction to be genuine. So in the first page, I see Lee Haney. And like, what's the deal with that? He was an IFBB pro. How do they work that out? Now, Lee Haney won the 1991 Mr. Olympia, and he retired. Wasn't Andre Munzer an IFBB pro? He was. Is that Linda Murray? Wasn't she an IFBB pro? Wasn't she an IFBB pro? Like, I wonder how they work that out. Yeah, I talked to Jeff briefly about this magazine. I didn't expect any IFBB pros to be in this magazine because they were signed to Weider. That was Weider's publication. Now I know Gary Stridham here eventually joined the WBF. I think Lou Ferrigno would have been retired at this time. So Mike Christian around this time, as far as I knew, he was still signed to the IFBB. Wow. All right. And here's Lee Haney again. And this guy, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. But this guy here, Sonny Schmidt. Sonny Schmidt, am I right? Doreen Yates, who was definitely an IFBB pro. Damn. All right. What if Arsenio Hall took his workouts more seriously? That's funny. That's goofy. That's goofy. Yeah, but these guys are okay. What's that? Okay. I don't know who he is. Yeah, I was expecting to see like a bunch of bodybuilders I'd never heard of. Honestly, I'm in terms of being a fan of bodybuilding, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself hardcore, but I'm beyond casual. You have casual fans. These are people that only know the biggest names. I'm definitely beyond that, but I'm not I'm not so hardcore. Bertle, is that Bertle Fox? I'm not so hardcore that I know every freaking bodybuilder to ever exist. Now Arnold, I assume by 1991 he wasn't signed to the IFBB because he was doing movies by then. So I can understand him being in the magazine. But I'm not so hardcore that I know every freaking bodybuilder to ever exist. So I don't know very much about the WBF. I only know Gary Stridham, but I only know that trajectory to the IFBB. That's all I know. So, Andreas Munzer. Now in 91, I'm not 100% sure, but I could have sworn that in 91, he would have been signed to the IFBB. Lee Haney won the Olympia in 91, and this came out in September. And I can't remember if the Olympia was in September back then. I don't remember. I really don't. But, Lee Haney could have possibly been retired from the IFBB by then. But I don't get this. Well, but I guess I'm also thinking in terms of modern times where, like, you wouldn't see a UFC fighter having anything to do with Bellator. For the most part, you wouldn't see, an Xbox game on the PlayStation, but I hear that that's on its way to changing, though. I've heard that, but so yeah, man. Hey, Jeff, you're going to have to tell me how these guys ended up in this magazine. How Lee Haney and Dorian Yates and Sonny Schmidt and Andreas Munzer, how the hell are they in this magazine? Sonny Schmidt, Milo Sarchev. Man, these guys were IFBB guys. As far as I knew, as far as I know. So that's interesting. So anyway, I usually give you guys, some knowledge about strength training that maybe you wouldn't. Oh, this guy wasn't he an IFBB pro? Baker. I usually give you guys some information that you Aaron Baker, yeah. I usually give you guys some information that you otherwise wouldn't hear elsewhere. But man, Rich Gaspari, what the fuck? He was an IFBB pro. Okay. So, don't blow your wad on this stuff, man. Don't blow your fucking wad, man. Bodybuilding is great and everything, and seeing your muscles grow is great. But, this is going to almost seem, paradoxical. But older people need to work out more than younger people do. And when people are young, they completely focus on how they look. As I've said 1,000 times, you're probably sick of hearing it by now, but they focus on how they look and getting six-pack abs and all of that stuff. But something that they don't tell you is, truthfully, older people need to work out more than younger people do. And that's because younger people, if you're 30 and under, you're going to feel good most of the time, no matter what you do. More specifically, just generally speaking, when you're a youngster, your body just tends to feel good. And we take that for granted. But as you get older, you become more inflamed, just generally speaking, and that's something that, most people don't tell you, so being Big Lou, now I'm sure he wasn't signed to the IFBB by then. He was huge. Being inflamed, inflammation is basically your body's response to injury or infection. The white blood cells come a running, and they engulf the area, and they focus on addressing the issue. And with all this activity, the area becomes red and inflamed and hot and sore, and just in general, as we get older, we have an increase in something called senescence. Okay. And senescence means aging, degeneration, or more specifically, it pertains to a point where your cells stop dividing, yet they're still alive and metabolically active. Okay, this is something that happens as you get older. And the end result of senescence is inflammation, chronic inflammation. So this is why, grandma and grandpa are always, my aching back, my aching this, my aching knees, my aching that. Now, this problem isn't just because of senescence. If they don't exercise, and their skeletal muscles are weak, that's ultimately going to translate into weak ligaments and tendons, and with loss of cartilage, that's just a recipe for disaster, just in general. So, it's, a loss of bone density, your diet and your genetics also factors into it. So, but just in general, senescence is something that every senior is going to have to deal with. Every person of a certain age. And the older you get, the more pronounced it gets. And I trained a 95-year-old, the oldest person I've ever trained. And this is facts that you aren't going to get from other people. You're going to get, bullshit information about getting a six-pack and making your chest bigger and how to become ripped and all of that. But the truth is, none of you are going to be training for that when you're 95. If you're lucky to live to be that old, or if you're 80 or 85, none of you are going to be training for that. You're going to be training to decrease inflammation. Okay, you're going to be training to improve your balance. You're going to be training to maintain basic mobility and functional strength. This is a fact. Because I kind of specialize in training older people. The most difficult demographic is like every day to me. And man, they're difficult. It's not like training, somebody Arnold's age, when he was at his peak. You get a real specific idea of how the body degenerates. So just understand that you're going to be training for relief from inflammation as you get older. And relief from inflammation is always temporary. Okay, it's always temporary. When you're of a certain age, it's going to come back no matter what you do. Now, there's 4 ways to get relief from inflammation. And in no particular order, it's exercise, And, and that includes strength training and cardio. There's stretching, which alleviates muscle tension and then increases blood flow to the muscle, which means oxygen and nutrients. There's massage, and there's drugs, meaning, anti-inflammatories. Pardon me if I'm wrong on this, but either Aleve or Advil is an anti-inflammatory. One of those big, sorry, I held that page for too long. Well, yeah, or maybe both of them. I can't remember. But look at this. They're advertising the freaking IFBB. All right, so I don't know, man. Maybe they had some type of they had to have some type of partnership with the IFBB. They had to. I mean, okay, that makes sense. All right. Yeah, this definitely looks awfully similar to Flex and Flex and Muscle and Fitness. But anyway, you're going to be training to diminish inflammation. That and that's something no one tells you. And like I said, you have the anti-inflammatories, the exercise, the stretching, the massage. And again, exercise includes strength training and cardio. Both help individually, and they're both better together, strength training and cardio. But that decreases inflammation, and it has to be relatively intense. But if it's too intense, it will increase inflammation. And that's where it gets tricky. You have to really know yourself. And if you're a trainer, you have to really pay attention to the client, because it's hard to really engage what's too much and too little, because too little intensity is not going to really change inflammation, but too much will create more, so you figure that out and you do what you can. And that decreases inflammation, in seniors. And so you need to think about that, because when you reach that point, the irony is, the paradox is, when you're a freaking old man, it's more important to work out than ever. And that's something that people don't get. Working out isn't something that you do to just, have a body like this. And that's the mistake that people make. They're so focused on lifting the biggest weights and having the biggest muscles. You don't realize that, unless they come up with some miracle concoction at some point, you're going to have to exercise just to minimize inflammation. That's how it is at this point. And by the way, as far as diminishing inflammation, there is a drug that you can take. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the name, but there's some drug that you can take that stops senescence. And remember, that is the loss of cellular division. And remember, these cells are, even though they don't divide anymore, they're still there, alive, and metabolically active. And that produces inflammation. And senescence settles in on certain organs and just certain tissues, or just certain cells in your tissues as you get older. So this is why, grandma and grandpa are always aching about or complaining about how their backs ache and so forth and so on. Who is that? Bob Paris? That's why grandma and grandpa, or Lila Brada. Oh, okay. That's why grandma and grandpa are always complaining about how much they ache. So you don't want to destroy your joints and put yourself in a position where you can't work out, because that does happen where, when you've been so hardcore over the years in terms of volume and you've just annihilated your joints to a point where strength training is out of the question, and that's when senior citizens get into trouble, when they can't do it, just whatever reason. And there could be a multitude of reasons, a multitude of reasons. Like, for example, if you get older and you have low hemoglobin, hemoglobin is responsible for transporting oxygen. And, I've dealt with seniors before who just had low hemoglobin for various reasons, so, and in that case, recovery is exponentially harder for them, because if you have trouble transporting oxygen to your muscles, it's going to be a problem. So even just recovery between sets is harder. They're constantly tired. So, and there could be a multitude of issues. So you don't want to add to that, by destroying your joints. So just remember that, when you're an old freaking man, strength training is going to be more important than ever. You know what I mean? It's not like you just like ride off into the sunset and say, oh, well, who cares if I have a six-pack now? I'm 75. I'm 80. Who cares if I'm built? I'm an old man now. It's just beginning, bro. It's just beginning. Because like I said, that inflammation is gonna pile up. You know what I mean? And that drug, that I can't remember the name of it, but there is some drug that you can take that's supposed to stop senescence of the cells, but you have to take it continuously. It's not like you take it one time and you don't worry about it. It's continuous, so there's that, and your other options are to exercise. Gary Stridham. I know he was a WBF guy. He's very saturated in this picture here. Yeah, it's very full delts. That's the equivalent of a really awesome physique, and particularly for that era, and guys, man, just, I don't know. They just, he's saturated. He doesn't have a bloated gut. He's shredded. I don't know, great physique. And conditioning like this was common back then. That's really awesome. It's a great picture. But anyway, you don't want to think that, hey, I'm old now. Who cares how I look? You're going to want to work out just to eliminate inflammation and to maintain bone density, functional strength, mobility, metabolic activity. It's great for your cardiorespiratory system, great for your posture. It's great for your brain, the neuroplasticity of the brain. It's great, for everything I mentioned before, producing dopamine, but just, I work with seniors, man. And remember, it doesn't end when you're young. As you get older, it's going to be more important than ever. The lady that I work with, the 95-year-old, every time I come in there, I feel like she's a freaking wrinkled up blow up doll. Because I come in there and she's stiff. her balance is off, she's tired, her back hurts, and we go through a series of movements, functional exercises, mobility exercises designed to alleviate inflammation. And like I said, when I said when I come in, she's like a wrinkled up blow up doll. The session breathes life into her. You know what I mean? And by the end of the session, she always feels better, you know. But by the time I see her again, she's that same old wrinkled up blow up doll when I walk through the door, you know. So just remember that, you know, you'll be using exercise just to alleviate pain as you get older. And that's something that no one talks about, you know, because exercise is the best means of alleviation of inflammation for senior citizens. At this point, you know, maybe in the future they'll come up with something better. But for right now, exercise, stretching, massage, and drugs is all you have. And they're all temporary. You're going to have to do it again. All right. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this. This is really interesting, man. You know, I just it's surprised to see the integration with the IFBB. You know, I would have thought they would have been markedly different. But then again, who the hell were they going to talk about if they didn't, you know, mention anybody from the IFBB? I wonder how they worked that out. All right. Anyway, I hope you guys liked it. Please click like if you did. Leave a comment and consider subscribing. And I will be back with more information and content on the fitness industry, personal training, and strength training in general. This is PLA Mind and Body Works. See you guys next time. Thanks. And thanks again, Jeff.